I've searched the depths of the interweb to look for the worst horror movie remakes, and I've managed to come up with these 20 films that'll surely make you wish the remake trend had never existed. And of course, to fully know if it's a bad remake, I had to watch the original first and its sequels, and the remake after to judge it fairly. It was fun hunting bad horror remakes, too bad I can't say the same when watching them. Remakes are supposed to bring new life to the franchise and introduce it to a new audience, but sadly, these movies on the list failed to do just that, from being pointless to outright painful to watch. Here are 20 of the worst horror movie remakes. The 1976 original manages to bring out the emotions of its audience, thanks to its beautiful story, likable characters, and shocking third act. But this remake from director Kimberly Peirce has no emotion to deliver. It felt like any other movie, something that you'll watch then just completely forget about. Chloe Grace Moretz as Carrie feels miscast, and every other character is nothing more but forgettable victims. Not that this is a bad movie or anything, it's just that when compared to the original, this remake just doesn't stand a chance. The movie that traumatized everyone in the 2000s, The Grudge tells the story of an American social worker, played by Sarah Michelle Gellar, and a family living in Japan who have fallen victim to their house's curse. This remake of the Japanese Ju-on movies manages to scare everyone with its iconic rattling ghost Kaeko, and is even more popular than the movies that it was based on, well, in here at least. But what puts this movie on the list is that it just completely fails as a remake. Every scares are pulled out of the original, with nothing new to offer, and the storytelling that made the franchise so intriguing has been simplified. It may be more popular, but it doesn't make it a better film. The original Black Christmas is one of the best slasher films of all time, and is also a very underrated classic, so remaking it was actually a good idea to introduce it to a new audience. This 2006 remake could have been a decent take on the underrated classic, with a great cast, beautiful cinematography, and very gory kills. But of course, it wouldn't be here for a reason. One of the most creepiest slashes, Billy, had been completely ruined by adding a very long and unnecessary backstory, which removed what made him so creepy and mysterious in the first place. It goes to show that one little thing could ruin an entire movie. He's hoping that a director's cut would be released, removing all the backstories to Billy. In this remake of the 2004 Thai film the same name, we follow the story of a couple named Ben and Jane, after being in a car accident which resulted in a girl's death, and they now find themselves being haunted by its spirits. 2008 Shutters offers nothing new that we've never seen before, aside from changing its location to Japan to cash in on the success of The Grudge. It doesn't have any significant changes to make this movie worth seeing. In the end, it's just another forgettable remake that should have never existed. The original Rocky horror film from 1975 is one of the most beloved and celebrated cult classic movies of all time. So this remake from director Kenny Ortega, known for the musical classics such as the High School Musical trilogy and The Descendants, had big shoes to fill. But when it's finally released, Let's Do the Time Warp's Again's biggest mistake would ultimately be its existence. This 2016 remake is full of cringe-inducing moments and lifeless saying that'll put you to sleep instead of singing along. If this was ever your first introduction to the Rocky horror film, well, I wouldn't blame you if this made you want to not watch the original film. The most hated remake on the list, 2010's A Nightmare on Elm Street is often considered as the worst and most insulting remake ever, and for many reasons. It not only ruined Freddy by making him a pedo, but also somehow manages to ruin the character Nancy, a strong and independent final girl, turned into a boring and generic person that'll make you wish you were asleep instead. Although the main reason why it's truly hated in the community just never made sense to me. The recasting of Freddy Krueger and the comedic elements which were introduced in the later sequels is removed in favor of a more darker story that's reminiscent of the original Stone. And these are all valid excuses, as it is a remake. But I guess sometimes it's just hard to please fans. While it may be bad, it's far from the worst horror remake of all time. And trust me, there are much more worse remakes than this. There's really not a lot of things to say about this remake of the 1959 classic, House on Haunted Hill. Aside from its cheesiness, there's nothing worth remembering about this movie. In fact, after watching it, I've already forgotten everything about it. So much that I don't even have any notes on this film. It's just a completely forgettable film. And now, we've reached the remakes which are so bad that it's just painful to watch. Starting with this remake of the 1973 film of the same name. The Crazies follows the story of a couple as they try to survive the madness. The original Crazies film is not a great movie or anything, but seeing a group of survivors slowly falls apart as they turn insane just makes for a very entertaining watch. But in this remake, I did not feel any connection to the characters at all. And since zombie films were popular at the time of its release, the crazy people now look and act like zombies. And hell, even the story itself sounds like it's from a zombie film. It's loud, it's zombies, and a bad remake. It's the Crazies. One of the most painful remakes to watch, 2015's Poltergeist is as entertaining as watching a television static. Instead of a unique and fun film like the original, we get annoying characters that complain all the time with bad acting, and a story that is made up of tired cliches. The movie was so painful that I couldn't even focus on it at all. And if I did focus, then maybe it would probably be higher on the list. It's not a good remake, nor is it a good ghost movie. What even is the point? Now, both Pet Sematary and Poltergeist are on the same level of quality that they could have easily just switched places. They're just both unbearable to watch. The original Pet Sematary is, for me, one of the best films that I have ever seen, and I'm devastated to see it be remade like this. The second adaptation of the Stephen King's novel is one of the most dullest and bland films on this list. It tried to be darker than the 1989 film but just failed miserably. It did try something new, but it didn't even matter as all of it was already spoiled in the trailer. This is a movie that is better left buried. 2008's Day of the Dead is a remake of one of the best zombie films of all time, so remaking it is of course going to be a difficult task. But Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead proved that you can still make a great remake of a classic, even if it's strayed away from its resource material. And so, this remake tried to do just that, but completely fails on every single level. Well, first, it strayed away too much from the original that it's barely recognizable. It could have simply been its own movie. It's so absurd and over the top that the zombies could even crawl in the ceiling like a spider, and the iconic zombie of the original has been replaced by a vegan zombie. Yes, you heard me right, a vegan. It's a complete mess of a film, but in a so bad it's good kind of way. Oh, and this is not going to be the only time we'll be seeing the name Day of the Dead on the list. A remake of the 2002 movie, 2016's Cabin Fever is nothing more but a shameless cash grab that brings nothing new to the table. It's basically the same movie from 2002, but with no improvements, and has none of the humor that makes the original fun to watch. What's worse than a remake of a 14-year-old film? A shot-for-shot remake of a 14-year-old film. The only way for you to enjoy this movie is if you're a millennial who can't bear to watch movies that aren't made in the 2010s. These kinds of movies should never be supported. The original movie, titled A Tale of Two Sisters, is one of my favorite Korean horror movies of all time. So when I found out about this remake, I was actually excited to see it, until I found out that this remake is nothing more but a boring mess. A remake that completely disregarded what made the original great and shocking, and instead focused more on the ghost aspect, and with a predictable twist that even people that haven't seen the original would still see coming. There's nothing to see here, and you'd be better not inviting this film into your own entertainment system. Here's another remake that tried to cash in on the success of other Asian horror remakes. But what makes Paul so special is that it's so painfully bad that my mind completely erased it from my memory, and almost forgot to even include it on the list. Just like The Uninvited, this remake focused way too much on the ghost aspect, and even changed its third act to feature bad CGI ghosts. The changes that it brought completely forgot the original's message, making this remake pointless. The past two remakes on the list all completely missed the point and removed what made the original so captivating. And this remake of the 2008 film of the same name is no exception, but is somehow even worse. Starting off as a shot-for-shot remake until taking a completely different direction when things finally started happening, by completely taming down all of the gore and the ambiguity in its story, the aspects which made the original film so infamous. Removing the gore alone was a big sin. A movie devoid of any kind of message, you're left with a boring and lifeless film. The 2008's Prom Night follows the story of a young girl named Donna, as she and her friends are stalked by a man who is killing all of them one by one in the most PG-13 way possible, in their senior prom. This remake took the name of the 1980 original and made their own story with it. Now, it would have been fine, but this movie is just way too boring that it made me want to choke myself just to stop watching this. It doesn't even have any interesting kills to keep the audiences entertained. It's a slasher movie with zero blood on display. Who thought that would be a good idea? Once again, another remake of an Asian horror movie manages to get on the list, this time adapting the story of the Japanese 2003 film of the same name, by my favorite Japanese director, Takashi Miike. This remake tried to be a shot-for-shot recreation of the original but somehow came across as rushed and confusing instead. And it also took some inspiration from other popular horror movies, which made the movie as a whole feel so unfocused. Not only did it fail on copying the original's tone, but it also failed to be a ripoff of other films. This movie is so bad that it basically killed the Asian horror movie remake trend. Day of the Dead returns, with a new remake but with the same issues. This remake is nothing more but a shameless cash grab that feels like it arrived a decade late, and I can't believe I was actually excited for this movie. Everything that made the other movies on the list bad, well, Bloodline has it all. It's cheap, forgettable, and pointless. It's not even as good as the 2008 remake. I didn't even know it could be possible to have a zombie movie be so boring. A movie with zero redeeming qualities. There's a reason why you've never heard of this remake. Here's another remake that is so bad that everyone just forgot about it. April Fool's Day is one of the most soulless remakes on the list. And just like any other soulless remakes, it completely threw everything that made the original great and replaced it with a cheap story that feels like it's from a soap opera. Not only does the story feel like a soap opera, but also its production value. From its cinematography, setting, costumes, everything. And it tried way too hard to make every single scene way too overdramatic, which made the movie unintentionally hilarious. And if you thought this movie couldn't be any more dumber, well, the writing is so bad that it even spoiled its own twist before the main character started dying. With a very predictable twist and a very anticlimactic ending, you're doing yourself a favor by not searching for this mess and letting it all die all alone. It's all been leading up to this moment, the worst of the worst. The second attempt to remake the 1974 classic, Black Christmas 2019, follows the story of a group of sorority sisters also getting killed in the most PG-13 way possible. I originally intended to put this movie in the third place, but after a little bit of thinking, I've come to the conclusion that it wasn't exactly fair to place this movie in such a low place, when it's such an unbearable, offensive garbage. This movie makes Day of the Dead Bloodline look like an indie masterpiece. You might think that since it's the second remake, they might finally do the original movie justice. Well, that's where you're wrong, as this movie is even worse than the first remake that we've got. It removed what made Black Christmas, well, Black Christmas. The villain that made the original a classic has been completely removed, replaced by an uninteresting cult, and what's worse is that this remake isn't even a slasher, which is a complete disrespect to the original's fans and horror fans. 2019's Black Christmas is not only a bad remake but also a bad horror movie in general, with almost zero blood in displayed, and the movie's poster is bloodier than the actual movie itself, by the way. It even spoiled the entire movie in its own trailer, so there's really no point in watching this abomination. And not to mention how this movie degrades every single man and makes them be the villain, even the innocent one, thanks to the character who is a literal walking political message. Chris Watterson. To the people who thought this movie was better than the 2006 remake, well, they have got to be insane. Either that or they were paid. It's cheap, pathetic, offensive, repulsive, and an insult. Black Christmas 2019 will go down in history as the worst horror remake of all time. Of course, there are more horrible remakes out there that are still rotting on the shelves of some DVD rental places, and the search of the worst is not over yet. In fact, I've already got a second list ready full of even worse remakes, but not as bad as 2019's Black Christmas, of course. If you think I might have missed a remake that deserved to be on the list, well, make sure to put it on the comments below. And that would be all for now. Farewell.